My name is Joseph Croweagle, and I am 42 years old. For the past 3 years, I have worked as a stable hand at the Riverside Ranch in Wyoming, enduring daily humiliation and mockery from people who see only the color of my skin and not the man beneath it. This is the story of how my carefully hidden past came to light, and how one moment changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone who had dismissed me as just another Indian working in the barn. The Riverside Ranch is owned by William Harrison, a wealthy cattle baron who employs over 30 men to manage his vast operation. It's a beautiful spread covering 15,000 acres of prime Wyoming grassland, with modern facilities and some of the finest horses in the territory. I've worked here since 1919, when I returned from France with wounds that would never fully heal and memories that haunted my sleep. Most of the ranch hands treat me with a mixture of indifference and casual cruelty. To them, I'm just Joe, the Indian, a quiet, reliable worker who keeps to himself and never causes trouble. They don't know that I speak 4 languages fluently, that I graduated from Carlisle Indian Industrial School with honors, or that I spent 2 years fighting in the trenches of France with the American Expeditionary Forces. "Hey Chief," Tommy Sullivan would call out most mornings as I mucked out the stalls. "You gonna do a rain dance for us today? We could use some water for the cattle." The other men would laugh, and I would continue my work in silence. Tommy was the worst of them, a loud, ignorant man in his 30s who seemed to take particular pleasure in making jokes about my heritage. He'd grown up on a neighboring ranch and had never been more than 50 miles from home, but he considered himself an expert on Indian ways. "I heard Indians can talk to horses," he'd say, watching me work with the animals. "That true, Chief? You having conversations with these ponies?" I never responded to his taunts. I'd learned long ago that engaging with men like Tommy only made things worse. Instead, I focused on my work, which I did better than anyone else on the ranch. I had a natural way with horses. They trusted me, responded to my touch, and performed better under my care than with any other handler. Mr. Harrison had noticed this, which is why he'd kept me on despite the complaints from some of his men. "I don't care what color he is," I'd overheard him tell his foreman once. "That Indian knows horses better than any man I've ever seen." But even Mr. Harrison's respect was limited. He paid me less than the white workers, housed me in a small cabin apart from the main bunkhouse, and never invited me to join the men for their evening card games or weekend trips to town. I was useful, but I wasn't one of them. The isolation didn't bother me as much as it might have once. After what I'd seen in France, the mud and blood of the Argonne forest, the gas attacks that had scarred my lungs, the friends I'd watched die in shell holes, the petty cruelties of ignorant ranch hands seemed almost trivial. But there were moments when the weight of it all pressed down on me like a physical force. Moments when I remembered who I had been before the war, before I'd learned to make myself invisible to survive. Before the war, I had been Sergeant Joseph Croweagle of the 142nd Infantry Regiment, 36th Division. I had led men into battle, earned commendations for bravery, and been personally thanked by General John J. Pershing for my service as a scout and translator. I had been somebody. Now, I was just the Indian who worked in the barn. The morning that changed everything started like any other. It was September 15th, 1922, and I was in the main stable grooming Thunder, Mr. Harrison's prize stallion, when I heard the sound of automobile engines approaching the ranch house. This wasn't unusual. Mr. Harrison often had business visitors, but something about the sound made me look up. Through the stable doors, I could see a convoy of 3 black automobiles, pulling up to the main house, followed by a military vehicle flying American flags. "Well, I'll be damned," said Frank Morrison, one of the older ranch hands, as he peered out the stable door. "Looks like the Army's come calling." Tommy Sullivan pushed past him to get a better look. "Probably hear about them stolen horses from Fort Warren. I heard they've been looking for whoever's been rustling Army stock." "Don't be stupid," Frank replied. "Mr. Harrison don't steal horses. He sells them to the Army." I continued grooming Thunder, but I was listening carefully. Military visitors always made me nervous, though I couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was because they reminded me of a life I'd tried to leave behind. A few minutes later, Mr. Harrison himself appeared in the stable doorway, looking unusually formal in his best suit. Behind him stood a tall man in an Army colonel's uniform, along with 2 other officers I didn't recognize. "Gentlemen," Mr. Harrison announced to the assembled ranch hands, "this is Colonel James Mitchell from Fort Warren. He's here on official business." Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the group of workers. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. When his gaze fell on me, he paused, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Colonel Mitchell is looking for someone," Mr. Harrison continued. "A former soldier who might be working on one of the ranches in this area." "What did this soldier do?" Tommy asked with his usual lack of tact. "Nothing wrong," Colonel Mitchell replied, his voice carrying the authority of years of military service. "Quite the opposite, actually. We're trying to locate a war hero who seems to have disappeared after his discharge." My hands stilled on Thunder's coat. A cold feeling was spreading through my chest. "This man served with distinction in France," the colonel continued. "He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Purple Heart. He saved the lives of dozens of American soldiers and provided intelligence that helped win several key battles. Sounds like quite a fellow, Frank said. What's his name? Sergeant Joseph Crow Eagle, Colonel Mitchell said, and the world seemed to stop. Every eye in the stable turned to me. I could feel the weight of their stares, the shock and disbelief, radiating from men who had spent 3 years treating me like a second-class citizen. That's impossible, Tommy stammered. That's just Joe. He's just an Indian who works with the horses. Colonel Mitchell's expression hardened. Sergeant Crow Eagle is one of the most decorated Native American soldiers in the American Expeditionary Forces. He served as a scout and interpreter, speaking fluent German, French, and several native dialects. His intelligence work was instrumental in the success of the Musargan offensive. The silence in the stable was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the blood rushing in my ears. Sir, Colonel Mitchell said, addressing me directly, are you Sergeant Joseph Crow Eagle, formerly of the 142nd Infantry Regiment? For a moment, I considered denying it. I had worked so hard to become invisible, to leave that life behind. But looking at this officer, a man who understood what I had been, what I had done, I found I couldn't lie. Yes, sir, I said quietly. I am. The colonel stepped forward and, to the amazement of everyone present, saluted me. Sergeant Crow Eagle, it's an honor to meet you, sir. The word sir hung in the air like a thunderclap. Tommy Sullivan's face had gone pale, and Frank Morrison was staring at me as if I'd suddenly grown wings. Colonel, I said, returning the salute with movements that came back to me as naturally as breathing. What brings you here? We've been looking for you for 3 years. Sergeant, there's a ceremony next month in Washington. President Harding wants to personally thank the war's most distinguished heroes. Your name is on the list, but we couldn't locate you. I prefer my privacy, sir. I can understand that, Colonel Mitchell said, but your country hasn't forgotten your service, even if you've tried to forget it yourself. Mr. Harrison, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally found his voice. Joe, I mean, Sergeant? I had no idea. Few people did, sir, I replied. I preferred it that way, but why? Tommy blurted out, his usual arrogance replaced by confusion. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us why? Let us treat you like like what? I asked, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in 3 years. Like an Indian? That's what I am, Tommy. The war didn't change that. But you're a hero, Frank said, still struggling to process this revelation. I'm a man who did his duty, I corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. Colonel Mitchell studied me with professional interest. Sergeant, I've read your file. What you did at Belleauwood, the intelligence you gathered behind enemy lines, the men you saved during the gas attack at Chateau d'Yeri, that was far beyond the call of duty. I didn't want to remember those places, those moments when death had been so close I could smell it on the wind. I did what needed to be done. Sir. Yes, you did. And your country wants to recognize that. With respect, Colonel, I've already been recognized. I have my medals. I don't need ceremonies or speeches. Maybe not, the colonel said. But maybe your country needs to give them. Maybe we need to be reminded that heroism comes in all colors, from all backgrounds. I didn't like talking about the war, but there was something about David's earnest curiosity that made it easier. It wasn't as heroic as it sounds. I was just doing my job. The report I read said you saved over 200 American lives with that intelligence. Reports often exaggerate, maybe, but they also said you refused a field commission to lieutenant because you wanted to stay with your men. That was true. They'd offered to make me an officer, but I'd turned it down. Officers lived apart from their men, and I'd already spent too much of my life being separated from the people around me. I belonged with the enlisted men, I said simply. Because they were your brothers in arms. Because they were my family. The only family I had left. David was quiet for a moment. What happened to your original family? It was a question I rarely answered, but something about this young man's genuine interest made me want to share. My parents died in the influenza epidemic of 1901. I was sent to Carlisle Indian School when I was 12. That must have been difficult. It was designed to be difficult. The school's motto was kill the Indian, save the man. They wanted to strip away everything that made us who we were. Did it work? I considered the question. In some ways, I learned to speak English without an accent, to read and write better than most white men, to dress and act like a white man when necessary. But they couldn't kill what was inside. Me, my connection to my people, my understanding of who I was. Is that why you enlisted? To prove you were as American as anyone else. Partly, but mostly because it was the right thing to do. This country has its flaws, but it's still my country. When it was threatened, I wanted to defend it, even though it hasn't always treated you fairly, especially because of that. I wanted to show that Native Americans could be patriots, could serve with honor, could be trusted with the most important responsibilities. And did you? Show that, I mean. I tried, but as you can see, it didn't change much. I came home to the same prejudices, the same assumptions. David shook his head. That's not right. What you did should have mattered. It did matter. To the men I served with, to the officers who knew what I'd done. But to most people, I was still just an Indian. That's why you hid who you were. That's part of it. But it was also because I needed time to figure out who I was after the war. Combat changes you. It strips away illusions, shows you things about yourself and the world that you can't unsee. What kind of things? I was quiet for a long moment, remembering. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. I learned that leadership isn't about giving orders, it's about earning trust. And I learned that the color of a man's skin matters a lot less than the content of his character when bullets are flying. Those sound like valuable lessons. They are, but they're also heavy lessons. When you come home carrying that kind of knowledge, it's hard to go back to pretending that the petty prejudices and small-minded thinking of civilian life matter. So you became invisible. I became simple, or at least, I tried to. I thought if I could just be a stable hand, just work with horses and avoid complications, I could find some peace. Did you find peace? For a while, but peace built on hiding. Who you are isn't really peace. It's just postponing the inevitable. And now I have to decide whether I'm ready to be myself again. All of myself, the war hero, the Native American, the man who's seen too much and done too much to ever be truly simple again. The next few days brought a steady stream of visitors to the ranch. Word of my identity had spread throughout the county, and people were curious to meet the war hero who'd been hiding in plain sight. Some visitors were genuine veterans who wanted to share their own stories, local officials who wanted to thank me for my service, historians who were interested in documenting Native American contributions to the war. Others were less welcome newspaper reporters looking for a sensational story, curiosity seekers who wanted to gawk at the Indian war hero, and politicians who saw an opportunity for publicity. I turned away most of them, but I did agree to speak with a reporter from the Wyoming Tribune, partly because I thought it might be important to tell my story in my own words. "Why did you hide your military service?" he asked, pencil poised over his notepad. "I didn't hide it. I just didn't advertise it. There's a difference." "But surely you knew that people would treat you differently if they knew you were a decorated veteran." "Yes, I knew that. But I didn't want to be treated differently because of what I'd done in the war. I wanted to be treated with basic human dignity because I'm a human being." "Don't you think your military service proves that Native Americans can be loyal Americans?" "I think Native Americans have been proving their loyalty to this land for thousands of years. We don't need military service to validate our right to be here." "But doesn't your example show that Native Americans can assimilate into American society?" I set down my coffee cup and looked at him directly. I didn't assimilate. I learned to navigate between two worlds, my native heritage and American society. But I never stopped being Lakota. The war didn't make me more American. It made me more aware of what America could be if it lived up to its ideals. The reporter scribbled furiously. "And what are those ideals?" "That all men are created equal. That people should be judged by their character, not their race. That this country is big enough for all of us, native, immigrant, black, white, to build something better together." Do you think that's possible? I have to believe it's possible. Otherwise, what did I fight for? A week after Colonel Mitchell's visit, I received a telegram from Washington. President Harding's office was formally inviting me to attend a ceremony honoring distinguished veterans. The president wanted to personally thank me for my service and present me with an additional commendation. I stared at the telegram for a long time, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to decline, to maintain the quiet life I'd built. But another part, the part that remembered the weight of responsibility, the pride of service, was ready to step back into the light. That evening, I made my decision. I would go to Washington not because I needed recognition, but because my country needed to see that heroism comes in all colors, from all backgrounds. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for Joseph Crow Eagle to stop hiding and start leading. Again, the train journey to Washington, D.C. gave me time to think about how much my life had changed in just 2 weeks. As the Wyoming landscape rolled past my window, I reflected on the man I'd been, the man I'd become, and the man I was trying to be. Colonel Mitchell had arranged for me to travel in a private compartment, a courtesy that felt strange after 3 years of deliberate invisibility. The porter, a dignified black man named Samuel, treated me with the respect due to any first-class passenger. But I could see the curiosity in his eyes when he read my name on the ticket. "Excuse me, sir," he said as he brought me dinner, "but are you the Joseph Crow Eagle I've been reading about in the newspapers?" "I suppose I am." "Well, sir, I just wanted to say thank you. My son served in France too with the 369th Infantry Regiment." He wrote home about the Native American soldiers he met, said they were some of the bravest men he'd ever known. "Your son sounds like a good man." "He was, sir. He was killed at Benmar," and Samuel's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, sir. But I wanted you to know what you boys did over there. It mattered. It mattered to my son, and it matters to me." After Samuel left, I sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about all the men who hadn't come home, all the families who'd paid the ultimate price. The recognition I was about to receive felt hollow compared to their sacrifice. I arrived in Washington on a crisp October morning. Colonel Mitchell met me at Union Station, along with a young lieutenant who would serve as my escort during my stay. Sergeant Crow Eagle, the colonel said, shaking my hand warmly. Welcome to the nation's capital. Thank you, sir. I have to admit, I never expected to see this place. Well, you're here now, and you're going to be treated with the honor you deserve. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of activities I'd never imagined. I met with officials from the War Department, who briefed me on the ceremony and the additional commendation I would receive. I was interviewed by reporters from major newspapers, photographed for magazines, and introduced to other veterans who were being honored. But the most meaningful moment came when I met with a group of Native American veterans who had traveled to Washington for the ceremony. There were 12 of us in total: Lakota, Cherokee, Navajo, Blackfoot, and others representing tribes from across the country. Brothers, said an older Navajo man named Thomas Begay, we have come together not just to receive honors, but to show our people that we served with pride, and to show the white world that we are Americans too, added a young Cherokee veteran named Robert Ridge. We were always Americans, I said. This land was ours long before there was a United States. We're not becoming Americans, we're helping America become worthy of its ideals. The conversation that followed was unlike any I'd had since returning from France. These men understood the complexity of serving a country that had often treated our people as enemies. They understood the weight of representing not just ourselves, but our entire race in the eyes of white America. When I was in the trenches, said a Lakota veteran named James Red Cloud, the white soldiers didn't see me as an Indian. They saw me as a brother, someone they could count on. It was the first time in my life I felt truly accepted. But then we came home, Robert Ridge added, and suddenly we were Indians again, second-class citizens in the country we'd bled for. That's why this ceremony matters, Thomas Begay said. Not for us, but for our children. They need to see that their fathers were heroes, that their heritage is something to be proud of. The ceremony itself took place on the south lawn of the White House, with hundreds of distinguished guests in attendance. As I stood in formation with the other honorees, I thought about the journey that had brought me here from a reservation, school designed to kill the Indian, through the trenches of France, 2-3 years of hiding in a stable, and finally to this moment of recognition. President Harding was a tall, dignified man with silver hair and a commanding presence. When he reached me in the line of veterans, he paused, studying my face with genuine interest. Sergeant Crow Eagle, he said, I've read about your service. What you did for your country goes far beyond the call of duty. I did what any soldier would do, Mr. President. No, you did what a hero would do. And more than that, you've shown that patriotism knows no racial boundaries. He pinned an additional medal to my uniform, a Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. This honor belongs to all the men who didn't come home, I said, double quotes. Yes, it does. But it also belongs to you, and to what you represent, the very best of America. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the East Room of the White House. I found myself surrounded by congressmen, generals, and society figures, all eager to meet the Indian war hero. Most were genuinely respectful, but I could sense the underlying curiosity. The way they studied me as if I were an exotic specimen. It was during this reception that I met someone who would change my perspective on the entire experience. Dr. Charles Eastman, a Santee Dakota physician and author who had become one of the most prominent Native American voices in the country. Sergeant Crow Eagle, he said, approaching me with a warm smile. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Dr. Eastman, the honor is mine. I've read your books, and I've read about your service. You've done something remarkable not just in France, but here today. How so? You've forced America to see us as we really are, not as relics of the past, but as full participants in the nation's present and future. I'm not sure one ceremony changes much, perhaps not by itself, but symbols matter, stories matter. When a young Native boy reads about Joseph Crow Eagle in the newspaper, he sees possibility. He sees that he can be both proud of his heritage and successful in the wider world. And what about the young Native boy who sees how I was treated before anyone knew about my military service? Dr. Eastman nodded thoughtfully. That's the harder lesson, isn't it? That recognition often depends on proving ourselves according to white standards. Exactly. I shouldn't have needed to be a war hero to be treated with basic dignity. No, you shouldn't have. But the reality is that change comes slowly, and sometimes it comes through the actions of individuals who are willing to stand up and be counted. Is that what you think I'm doing? I think you're doing something even more important. You're showing that we can be fully ourselves, Native and American, traditional and modern, humble and heroic without contradiction. That evening, I attended a dinner hosted by the Secretary of War. The guest list included some of the most powerful men in Washington, and I found myself seated between a senator from Montana and a general who had served in the Philippines. The conversation was polite but probing. These men were curious about my background, my education, my plans for the future. Some seemed genuinely interested in understanding the Native American experience. Others appeared to be looking for confirmation of their existing beliefs. Tell me, Sergeant, the senator said, do you think your military service has changed how your people view America? My people have always viewed America as our home, Senator. We've been here for thousands of years. Of course. Of course. But I mean, do you think military service helps with assimilation? I set down my fork and looked at him directly. Senator, with respect, I didn't serve in France to assimilate. I served because this is my country, and when it was threatened, I wanted to defend it. But surely you see the value of Native Americans adopting American ways. I see the value of all Americans learning from each other. Native peoples have much to teach about living in harmony with the land, about community responsibility, about spiritual values. We don't need to abandon who we are to be good Americans. The general leaned forward. But don't you think there's value in a common culture, a shared set of values? Absolutely. But those shared values should include respect for diversity, appreciation for different perspectives, and recognition that strength comes from unity, not uniformity. The conversation continued in this vein throughout the dinner, with me finding myself in the unexpected role of educator and advocate. It was exhausting, but also important. These men had power, and if I could help them understand even a little bit about the Native American experience, it might make a difference. The next morning, I met with Colonel Mitchell for breakfast before my departure. "How do you feel about the last few days?" he asked, overwhelmed, honored, frustrated. Frustrated. It shouldn't take a war and a medal to get people to see Native Americans as human beings worthy of respect. You're right, it shouldn't. But change happens slowly, and sometimes it takes dramatic gestures to get people's attention. And what happens when the attention fades? When I go back to Wyoming and the newspapers move on to other stories. That depends on what you do next. What do you mean? Colonel Mitchell leaned back in his chair. Sergeant, you have a choice to make. You can go back to Wyoming and return to your quiet life in the stable. Or you can use the platform you've been given to make a real difference. What kind of difference? There are Native American veterans all over the country who are struggling to get the benefits they've earned, who are facing discrimination despite their service. There are young Native people who need role models, who need to see that they can succeed without abandoning their heritage. You're talking about becoming some kind of spokesman. I'm talking about becoming a leader. You have credibility now with the military, with the government, with the press. You could use that to advocate for your people. I never wanted to be a public figure. Most good leaders don't. But sometimes circumstances choose us, rather than the other way around. On the train ride back to Wyoming, I thought about Colonel Mitchell's words. I thought about the Native American veterans I'd met in Washington, about the young people who might be inspired by my story, about the responsibility that came with recognition. I also thought about the ranch hands who had spent 3 years mocking me, about Mr. Harrison's belated respect, about the way people's attitudes had changed overnight when they learned about my military service. When I arrived back at the ranch, I found that word of my Washington trip had preceded me. There was a crowd waiting at the train station, ranch hands, townspeople, local officials, and reporters. Someone had made a banner that read, "Welcome home, hero." Tommy Sullivan was at the front of the crowd, and when he saw me, he stepped forward. "Joe," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "we want you to know that we're proud of you, proud to know you, proud to work with you, and we're sorry." Frank Morrison added, "Sorry for the way we treated you, sorry it took a medal to make us see what was right in front of us." I looked at these men, some who had tormented me, others who had simply ignored me, and felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at their past behavior, appreciation for their current efforts, and sadness that it had taken so long to reach this point. "Thank you," I said simply. "But I hope you understand I'm the same man I was a month ago. The only thing that's changed is what you know about me." "That's not true," said a voice from the crowd. It was David Harrison, Mr. Harrison's son. "What's changed is that we've been forced to confront our own prejudices, our own assumptions, and that's made us better people." "Has it?" I asked. "Or has it just made you more careful about who you mock?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. "I guess we'll find out," Frank Morrison said finally. "But I can tell you this, I'm going to try to be better. Not just to you, but to everyone." Over the following weeks, I settled back into life at the ranch. But everything was different. I was no longer the invisible Indian in the stable. I was the head horse trainer, a position that came with respect and responsibility. More importantly, I began receiving letters from Native Americans across the country, veterans seeking help with benefits, young people asking for advice, families dealing with discrimination. I realized that Colonel Mitchell had been right. I had been given a platform, and I had a choice about how to use it. I started writing back to these letters, offering what help I could. I began speaking at local schools about Native American history and culture. I worked with veterans organizations to ensure that Native American soldiers received the benefits they'd earned, and slowly, I began to understand that my journey from invisible stable hand to recognized war hero was about more than personal vindication. It was about showing that respect and recognition should be based on character and contribution, not race or background. The mockery had ended, but the real work was just beginning. And for the first time since returning from France, I felt ready to do that work not as someone hiding from his past, but as someone proud of his heritage and committed to building a better future. They had mocked the native man who worked in the barn, but now they called him sir. And more importantly, they were learning to see beyond the surface to the man beneath. It was a start, the end.